Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching Shazam, the political vigilante. So we haven't talked too much about RFK Jr. on this show. I mean, I know he's pro Bitcoin. I'm in favor of Bitcoin, but he's going to have to bring way more to the table than that. And Chris Hedges, who we've had on the show, whose books I've read, someone I respect immensely, has a new article out. And so let's just go through what Hedges says about RFK Jr. Here it is. RF Kennedy Jr., the Israel lobby's useful idiot because he still defends Israel. The long nightmare of oppression of Palestinians is not a tangential issue. It's a black and white issue of a settler colonial state imposing a military occupation, horrific violence, and apartheid backed by billions of US dollars on the indigenous people of Palestine, and it's all powerful against the all powerless. Opening paragraph of Hedges, making it very clear about the Palestine-Israel issue. Israel uses its modern weaponry against a captive population that has no army, no navy, no air force, no mechanized military units, no command and control, and no heavy artillery, while pretending intermittent acts of wholesale slaughter are wars. The crude rockets fired at Israel by Hamas and other Palestinian resistance organizations, a war crime because they target civilians, are not remotely comparable to the 2,000-pound bunker buster Mark 84 bombs with a kill radius of over 32 yards and which create a supersonic wave of pressure when they explode that have been dropped by Israel on crowded Palestinian neighborhoods. The thousands of Palestinians killed and wounded and targeted destruction of basic human infrastructure, including electrical grid and water purification plants. Malnutrition as an endemic in the occupied territories. High proportions of Palestinian population are deficient of vitamins A, D, and E, which play key roles in vision, bone health, and immune function, according to a 2022 World Bank report. The report also notes that over 50% of those aged 6 to 23 in Gaza and over half of its pregnant women are anemic, and more than a quarter of pregnant women and more than a quarter of children aged 6 to 23 months in the West Bank are anemic. 80% of Gaza's children suffer from depression following 15 years of Israeli blockade, according to a 2022 report from the Save the Children, and over 51% of children were diagnosed with PTSD following a third major war in Gaza in 2014. Only 4.3% of the water in Gaza is considered fit for human consumption. So Hedges is laying out all of the hard data to show how awful the Palestinians are treated, right? Zionism's goal since before Israel's inception has been to displace Palestinians from their land and reduce those who remain to a struggle for basic subsistence, as Israelis historian Professor Ian Hope notes. And then this is just, read the whole article. I'm not going to read the whole article because he lays all this out, right? I watched Israeli soldiers taunt boys in Arabic over the loudspeakers of their armored Jeep in the Khan Yunis refugee camp in Gaza. The boys, almost 10 years old, then threw stones at an Israeli vehicle. The soldiers opened fire, killing some, wounding others. He's witnessed it firsthand as a war correspondent, right? So he goes on to say, there's a heavy political price to pay for defying Israel, whose overt interference in our political process makes the most tepid protests about Israeli policy a political death wish. The Palestinians are poor, forgotten, and alone, and this is why the defiance of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians is the central issue facing any politician who claims to speak on behalf of the vulnerable and the marginalized. To stand up to Israel has a political cost few, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., are willing to pay. So he's gutless, is what Hedges is saying. He's gutless. Yeah. But if you do stand up, it singles you out as someone who puts principles before expediency, who is willing to fight for the wretched of the earth and, if necessarily, sacrifice your political future to retain your integrity. Kennedy fails this crucial test of political and moral courage. Kennedy instead regurgitates every lie, every racist trope, every distortion of history, and every demeaning comment about the backwardness of the Palestinian people peddled by the most retrograde and far-right elements of Israeli society. He peddles the myth of what Pepe calls fantasy Israel. This alone discredits him as a progressive candidate. It calls into question the judgment and sincerity. It makes him another Democratic Party hack who dances to the macabre tune the Israeli government plays. Again, AIPAC gives a lot of money to the Democratic Party. And RFK Jr., let's be real clear here, RFK Jr. is not running as an independent. RFK Jr. is running as a Democrat. And AIPAC controls the Democratic Party, just like the NRA controls the Republican Party. And people might say, oh, well, you know, Hedges is a big Cornel West supporter. Well, Hedges is not going after RFK because he's a Cornel West supporter. Hedges is a supporter of Cornel West because Cornel West supports the Palestinian people. And if Cornel West didn't support the Palestinian people, Chris Hedges would be writing an article like this about Dr. Cornel West. Because Hedges has integrity. Hedges has a moral compass. RFK is an opportunist. I think he jumped on the Bitcoin thing just because he's like, oh, I'll get some Bitcoin voters, some Bitcoiners to vote for me. So I'm so glad Hedges is doing this. I'm really glad he's doing this. In the same way, I'm glad Dr. West didn't run as a people. When he first was running as the People's Party, I was like, oh, bad idea. Ron Placone and I did several videos talking about it. So, Kennedy has vowed to make the moral case for Israel, which is the equivalent of making the moral case for apartheid South Africa. He repeats almost verbatim talking points from the Israeli propaganda playbook put together by the Republican pollster and political strategist Frank Luntz. The 112-page study, marked not for distribution or publication, which was leaked to Newsweek, was commissioned by the Israeli Project. It was written in the aftermath of the Operation Cast Lead in December 2008 and January 2009, when 1,387 Palestinians and 9 Israelis were killed. The strategy document is the blueprint for how Israeli politicians and lobbyists sell Israel. It exposes the whole gap between the what Israeli politicians say and what they know to be the truth. It is tailored to tell the outside world, especially Americans, what they want to hear. The report is required reading for anyone attempting to deal with the Israeli propaganda machine. So read that report first. And I've covered on this show, also go to, I think it's called Break the Silence or Breaking the Silence, which is ex-Israeli soldiers who are coming forward saying, we were all lied to. It's not right how Israel is treating Palestinians. Also, there's Bet Salim, which is a group of it's an Israeli organization that is highly critical of the Israeli government's treatment of the Palestinians, right? So when ex-Israeli soldiers are like, this ain't right, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? And again, when people say stuff and they literally are repeating AIPAC talking points, which is what RFK Jr. is, which means he stands for nothing. He stands for nothing. He supports Israel. Marianne Williamson is trying to sell books. Good luck. And they got big, fat, blue D's next to their name, which means you cannot reform that party from within. And he's not trying to reform. RFK is not trying to reform that party from within. He's just pushing their narrative. He's just a couple of clicks left of Joe Biden, which isn't hard to do. The document, for example, suggests telling the outside world that Israel has the right to defend borders, but advises Israelis to refuse to define what the border should be. It advises Israeli politicians to justify the refusal by Israel to allow 750,000 Palestinians and their descendants who were expelled from their country during the 1948 war to return home. Although the right to return to guaranteed under international law by referring to this right as a demand. It also recommends arguing that Palestinians are seeing mass migrations to seize land inside Israel. It suggests mentioning the hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees from Iraq, Syria, and Egypt who fled anti-Semitism and violence in the Arab world after the creation of the Jewish state. The document recommends saying these refugees also left property behind. Nice tactic. In essence, justifying the Israeli program by the program Arab states carried out after 1948. It recommends blaming the poverty among Palestinians on Arab nations that have not provided a better life for Palestinians. So empathy for both sides, the document reads. Yeah. I doubt Kennedy has read or heard of Lunt's report, but he has been spoon-fed its talking points and naively spits them back. Israel only wants peace. And Israel does not engage in torture. Israel is not an apartheid state. Israel gives Israeli Arabs political and civic rights they don't have in other parts of the Middle East. Palestinians are not deliberately blah, blah, blah. Kennedy makes other claims, such as his bizarre statement that Palestinian Authority pays Palestinians to kill Jews anywhere in the world, along with falsifications of Middle Eastern history, which are so absurd, I will ignore them. But I list below examples from the volumes of evidence that implode the Luntz-inspired talking points Kennedy repeats on behalf of the Israel lobby. Not that any evidence can probably puncture his self-serving attachment to fantasy Israel. Once again, Hedges says it better than anybody else. If he's so woefully wrong on Palestine, as Hedges said, that should remove him as a progressive candidate, this alone. He doesn't even go into any stuff about vaccine, none of it. So, and I don't know people who say, well, he's going to challenge the military-industrial complex. Protecting Israel is a part of the military-industrial complex. We send billions of dollars to Israel every year in weaponry. So how can you fight the military-industrial complex while you're supporting it against the Palestinian people? So even that like, yeah, well, he'll do good fighting the military-industrial complex. No, he won't. It's all lip service. If he's this easily spoon-fed AIPAC talking points, he'll capitulate to the war machine. He already is. If you capitulate to Israel, you're capitulating to the war machine. And this is not, again, part of the tactic is to say anyone that's critical of the Israeli government is anti-Semitic. That's not true. That's not true. Again, ex-Israeli soldiers are like, this is not right how we're treating them. So Israelis have been protesting their right-wing government. I'm in protest of my right-wing government in the United States. So you can be critical of a government's treatment of another people, and it doesn't make you an anti-this or an anti-that. I'm against anybody that's getting mistreated. And the United States military, United States government is mistreating people all over the world. Currently, we're giving people in Maui who have just gone through a horrible disaster. There's still 800 some missing people on Maui. They're getting $700 or something while we're just sending another $20-30 million on top of the $120 billion to Ukraine that we've already sent. So America's made it very clear that Ukrainians and what's happening in Ukraine is awful, but why do we have to choose? Why we can't even help our own citizens? So I'm sorry. I'm critical of the United States empire. I'm critical of the Israelis' treatment of the Palestinians. I'm critical of anybody mistreating a group of people. And yeah. So follow the money, connect the dots, get the truth. The military-industrial complex makes a lot of money supporting Israel. It makes a lot of money on a never-ending war against terror. We wasted $3.5 trillion in 20 years of Afghanistan, and that country is worse than it was. So the military-industrial complex wants this never-ending conflict in the Middle East. It's good for business. Follow the money, connect the dots, get the truth. Support what we're doing. We've been monetized again, so you can do super chat. You can become a YouTube member, and there's also ways below. You can join our Rockfin Premium, our Patreon, Venmo. We have a P.O. box. Support what we're doing, everybody. That's how we make Gotham great again and shave your knuckles for justice. Boom.